Thank you so much. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Robert, and today I would like to tell you a little bit more about the journey me and my company had to go through together. But before I start, there's gonna be like a small housekeeping exercise. Whoever of you is like tired or can't hear, or you're just like overwhelmed with the conference, or maybe it wouldn't be clear enough what I'm saying because of my accent or my English, you can scan and get the conspect of the speech I'm gonna have today in Polish and English. Be aware, it's not accurate because this presentation was changing by probably like the last possible moment. Nevertheless, I believe the message I tried to tell became the same between those two versions, okay? So I think with that, we can start. And I will start actually with a question to you. Have you ever been in such situation that you had to learn how to navigate the world again? That you need to learn how the laws of physics work again? If your answer is yes, we have something in common. Because such situation happened to me, I would say at least twice in my life. The first one was when I broke both of my arms during the vacation period. And yeah, that was the best holiday of my life. But basically, I had like bandages for over 10 years. And my primary caregiver was my dad, and he put like a lot of effort in that. Nevertheless, after our first feeding session, I understand I need to learn as quick as possible how to be independent on myself and how I can navigate the new reality, kind of with this new body I had, right? So if you ever be in such situation I was, probably you start to really appreciate anything that have like sharp edges and corners. But another situation like this happened to me when I decided to change my career from UX researcher that works for a small, agile, warm startup and transfer to Roche, which is a global, it's like a big corporation that operates more than 125 years. It's the world's leading company in terms of biotechnology. And by here, we understand that this corporation is producing pharmaceuticals, but also technologies, machines for diagnostics, and apps that supports its own working. It's operating in more than 150 countries in the world and employs more than 100,000 of people globally. And beside of those numbers and the slide that obviously is not employer branding, it's worth noting that actually this corporation also values such values as human rights, innovation, and inclusion. And just to not leave it as an empty words, our CEO 2 years ago signed a pledge under the Valuable 500 program, where he states that we, as an organization, will become fully digitally accessible. And this is not the part that I was ever scared about. The thing that kind of brought me to realize how I should adjust to the new reality was that from the UX specialist that was trying to implement by bottom-up approach accessible practices among my own team, I was invited to be part of a global team that is responsible for fulfilling this mission through. And I found it quite struggling. So today I would like to invite you to my journey through the struggles I came. And during this presentation, I will be using our own examples, but actually showing the tools and methods that helped me to find ourselves in this sometimes very messy, reality that big corporations can't be. I would be using also scientific literature, and on the QR code you've scanned previously, you could find also like the full list of resources for some data I'm using. I would be also using the data from the research I'm doing for my own PhD project, which is exactly about how big worldwide corporations implement digital accessibility in their actions. So, with that being said, I think we can start. And of course, whoever of you ever started to, I think so, working with accessibility, or try to think, okay, how I should implement accessibility in my organization, will be looking for guidance. And one of the very first things that probably you will find is this quote: accessibility is not a checklist. And I fully believe it's true. And I even can assume that most of you would agree with that sentence, that accessibility is not a checklist. But if you try to look for something more than this quote, you will find this, or something like this, or something like this. And frankly speaking, whoever, try to lie, the tools I was using before are just elaborate form of a checklist, right? It's WCAG standards, or actually evaluation sheet, that helped me implement accessibility on products I was working on, right? So, okay, so if not a checklist, what it is? Another thing you can find, and especially if you are trying to drive this change in your organizations, probably you found something called digital, or actually just accessibility maturity models. And what are those? So, looking through different presentations, but also information through internet, and not only internet, you can find out that those models are tools that should help guide change in your organization. They should also help you measure how mature you are as an organization, at what next steps you should do to be on the next level of that maturity. For example, the W3C, which is the organization responsible for establishing WCAG, or VUCAG, as you prefer, which we all know and love, have their own maturity model, where they claim it's a universal framework. So that means that anyone can apply that in your organization. And probably it sounds very helpful for many people that were in similar situation as us when we start to implement something. But another very interesting perspective into those models can actually bring scientific research. And although there is not so much about it, there is like one very important, I believe, research from 2 years ago made by DE&I and his team, where they have been analyzing 25 different accessibility models. And through this research, they found that most of those models have no empirical foundations for its creation. That really often, they have the form of stages, or surprise, surprise, our favorite checklists, or matrices. That's crazy here, actually, right? But other than that, those models really often lack the transparent ways how they've been evaluated. In other ways, we don't know if they were reflecting reality accurately or not, and also if the claims they were saying, like, for example, this model would work for everyone, is it true? Another thing that arose from that research was a doubt. If a model that was created for, let's say, agile, small startup would work also for governmental body or big corporation. We just don't know if it's true. And this way of thinking about growth is actually a very simple way of how we can perceive evolutionism, right? So evolutionism says that no matter who you are, there is like one path how you can develop. And you just need to kind of achieve another points on your development journey to become like this superhero in accessibility. But whoever is sitting here and has to know something about biology, it's not how the evolution look like. Evolution is like about adapting to the environment you are working in and doing your job. And really often those models do not recognize that we are working in different environments, and each of you can have different culture in your organization. My organization has different culture, your organization has different culture, and probably even the place we are here has totally different work culture. So, another question is actually where that thinking may came from in terms of accessibility. And here, we need to take, again, step back in time and go kind of like the fundamentals of design, or actually those design approaches that impact the most our understanding of accessibility. Here we have a slide with universal design and inclusive design. In business space, really often, they are used as synonymous. But actually, they are two different things. And this became clearer whenever you read more about it and how both of them were established. We will start with the universal design because I just believe it's like more recognizable approach to design. So this design emerged in the 80s in United States and was developed by architect with disability Ronald Mace. And the idea for Mace was to design products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need of adoption or specialized design. And that's true. But actually, beside of that definition, what is worth knowing is that this approach to design was built on a previous design, let's say current for making this, accessibility. It was called barrier-free design and was established because of like very largely growing number of war veterans in the United States, which had problem with reaching to departmental buildings. But also, I think it wasn't like intention of Mace when he was like proposing like this school of design. But researchers points out that also this way of thinking about building things promotes the thinking that one size fits all. Although, again, I don't think it's a Mace's intention when he was making that. Nevertheless, why it's, like promotes that thinking? Because, first of all, we never have a tool to say what all people mean. And actually, the tools that support us to create things in universal design are criteria, evaluations, and standards to check if our final product met what the designer was intending. Another thing is that this universal design, also because of its heritage, was like very heavily based on like body experience of a person and basically the bodies of people. And actually, from that arose inclusive design that arose as a contrapoint to universal design, mostly through the people with invisible disabilities and neurospicy folks that said, if this design is so universal, why doesn't it meet my need? What I feel still excluded from those designs that's supposed to be universal. Their answer was to focus on both, on access and if people feel welcomed whenever they are using the tools or programs or whatever else we are building. And instead of having like very strict list of requirements, inclusive design is focusing more on the process. How do we build the products? Instead of what criteria or qualities it should meet by the end. And the tool that supports this vision is called inclusive research. And now it's time when I will tell you a little bit more about inclusive research, although I think you can start, at least have like this imagination what it might be. So inclusive research, again, is more like a philosophy, how we should think about research and how we should design various research processes. The first usage of that word was used in participatory research with children with cognitive disabilities. And what does it mean? That means that those children were co-authors of this research. They was responsible for setting up the research goal, research questions, but also the research execution and analyzing the whole data that was gathered. So inclusive research would also promote, sorry, I mixed the languages, whoops. So yeah, it was promoting participation, but also was underlying that it's important to welcome and invite people who are belonging to various underserved groups. And actually, inclusive research help us to overcome our biases we may have whenever we think about what it means to include all the people. And this is like another topic that probably is quite similar to many people who are working in accessibility space. Laura Kalbach said that as we are working, especially in the IT industry, we are largely people of similar ages, abilities, but also economical status and and educational background, right? So those would really often impact how do we perceive or what we perceived as important to include or exclude, but exclude unwillingly, actually, from our designs. So inclusive research says, okay, so let's implement some tools that help us overcome or be mindful about our biases. And one of such tools is intersectionality wheel. I know that intersectionality was mentioned already a few times during this conference, and I think it's like the great time that we speak about that, because the concept of intersectionality says that each of us as a human being have different dimensions. And as you can see here on that wheel, it's divided into several pieces of cake, kind of, right? And each of us is built from the different sections of that cake. Another thing you can see on that wheel is that some parts of it are closer to the center, and those normally are groups that are considered to have impact into knowledge creation and establishing some standards of knowledge, how we know and build the things. While the areas you can see closer to borders are normally the voices that will be quiet, not listened to, when we try to expand our knowledge or build products. This wheel also says that we need to think very heavily about the context of things we are doing and where we are doing. The one you see here is actually established by Canadian Institute of Health Research. So it's tried to reflect very specifically the Canadian context. So that's why some of those parts you may feel are like mismatched with you, kind of. But also, what is important with that wheel, although you may think it kind of invites us to recognize and include everyone from this wheel, it's actually opposite. This wheel actually says that sometimes we would have to exclude someone from our research or design. But this will help us to do that in an informed way. It's really depending on the context, what you are doing, where you are doing, and for what purpose you are doing your research. So I would say, just to like echo a few things I heard previously on the conference, the intersectionality wheel and inclusive research also help us fight the dogmas we later or sooner find in the business. Like, for example, let's say, go fast, break things. With inclusive research in mind, we will start right there, think of go fast, but mind the people and the road signs. Break your toys, not people, right? The inclusive research would also change, for example, one of the dogmas like, you need 5 people for research, for example. It would say, I would rather first understand which contexts would bring most to my research, and then I would calculate the sample. In otherwise, it would say that the number is not important, but actually the diversity we kind of try to welcome in and invite into that research. And it was said at the beginning that I would be also using some examples. If I haven't said so, this is also the purpose of this presentation, to actually show how we used inclusive research as an agent for transformation of our organization. And the first one is that actually before we starting any, let's say, program implementation, we decided to go back to the people we kind of do that for. Because we also do those changes for our customers, our patients, but also our colleagues and employees. So we try to understand what, let's say, our people think about accessibility. What do they understand with that notion? And what might be the barriers, but also opportunities for us whenever we're going to be driving that change. And inclusive research actually told us that there is no point to invite everyone from our organization, right? We're like global organization, so it would be really hard to do that and include truly everyone. So instead, we focus on like very specific part of organization that was in theory responsible for delivering the IT solutions. But we instead said that it's important to hear also voices of marginalized people. And in this case, really often technical people or people who work, let's say, more in a background instead of just like business decisions and without, let's say, the direct power on how the business works. We've been also looking into the experience, how long they've been working with us. And lastly, we've been trying to track if the person is negative, neutral, or positive about our organization becoming fully digital accessible. And unfortunately, I can't tell too much now, but what was important for us that helped us find the three kind of different ways, or actually archetypes, that we should answer to. But also when we've been creating those, let's say, proto-persona, and those are like, actually it was personas, but when we've been designing that, we also cared about presenting the interaction between them. And as you can see here, really often the business is located on the, let's call it like North Hemisphere. So it would be very affecting how we operate as an organization. And there are also other personas in that story, which voices are also important in that story. As I spoiled, I won't tell too much now, but here I just wanted to invite you for tomorrow's panel, moderated by Dorota Orzeszek, where we're going to be diving in and where I would have a chance to speak with other wonderful people and actually telling you more what we found in that research and how we coined that into the change. But don't worry, there is like one thing I want to present like fully, and how the inclusive research or actually engined that. So it was our internal digital accessibility policy creation, right? And inclusive research told us, or actually inspired us, to listen to people, especially those who are like from the underserved groups. And big inspiration for us was the public protests of people with disabilities in United States in late 70s. And one of the slogans they were wearing on them or with them was "Nothing about us without us." And we kind of felt that, first of all, this is like the value we want to incorporate in our change program, but also it aligned pretty well with the inclusive design approach and inclusive research approach too. So how we do that in action. So with all the tools we know from inclusive research, we invited people from our organization to come and help us shape that policy. For that, we've been aiming to include people from the parts that we felt in our organization are excluded, but also the characteristics were or might be excluded, right? So in the end, this session or this group was built from, people who are varying or our corporal ladder from like very, very low to like very, very impactful. And they were accessibility experts, people with disabilities, but also allies, or people who decided, hey, I also have accessibility needs that are unmet in our organization. Another thing is that we actively promote and invited people from different regions than the global north. So we had a chance to invite also our colleagues from Africa or South America, and for many of them, sometimes it was the first time they ever had a chance to meet and discuss how do they understand accessibility and what does it mean for them. And during those sessions, we've been working together with that group so we could understand better how the current situation in our complex reality of organization affect them. What challenges they face whenever they are interacting or try to implement accessibility in their projects, but also identifying responsibilities for them and for organization. Based on that, we've been able to write a better policy. But I would say the biggest finding from those discussions was how often we think like very north, I would say, about accessibility. And although the claim is also true for many folks who are like in Africa or South America, we could exclude them and their needs they have towards accessibility in very specific context they are. So during writing that policy, we wanted to kind of change the scope, what accessibility is and why we are doing and driving that change in our company. So another things we implemented there was actually that we've tried to minimize the notion of what should you do and what you should follow, like specifically, and promote more why we are doing this and what values we believe are values. But of course, there were like our hypotheses that it would help, but we had to validate that. And together with the group of those people, not all 23, but like 13, we designed and do a test of that beta version of policy. Also to check if our claims are kind of true and if they resonate with the people. And we find out that by many people, and again, here also we've tried to keep a mix. So we had like technical expert, but also managers and people from underserved groups. We find out that really often this intersectionality part, where we are also saying that we are doing accessibility for people with disabilities, but also for people with different backgrounds, different countries, and from the different cultural context than you are, actually was found pretty well. One of our testers said that actually it's great. We are not saying it's for all, because no one can imagine what does it mean. But we are pinpointing the other groups that really often fight for the same as her, as a deaf employee. And that, first of all, it takes burden out of her, but also shows that those things are really usable for a very specific group of people. And to finish that presentation very slowly, because I believe I still have some time, I guess. Oh, perfect. So yeah, you can just wonder, okay, so what's there for me? What is like the, something you can take from that presentation? So in our case, inclusive research actually help us to better understand the very specific situations we are in and our own environment. It was also reasoning with the values that was important for our community, but also, and by community I mean our organization in general, right, for our employees, and also drive those values in our digital accessibility change. It was also mitigating the shortages of tools you can find, because I also want to mention, like those tools are available, you can use them. But probably in our case, we had to twitch on them, and inclusive research helped us to understand that and design, let's say, those changes into that. And lastly, it helped us to kind of understand in which philosophy we would like to go with when we implement those. And just to be clear, we still care about compliance to WCHD and legal, but we don't want to forget for whom we are doing all of that and recognize how different facets each of those person has. And it also became like driving values for our research code of ethics in organization that was established 2 years ago. And another question you can have, okay, but does it really have any sense what I am saying here? And actually, when we look about the changes and how the people may think about accessibility, we will find that, for example, in last year published Microsoft Accessibility Maturity Model, they don't claim it's universal. They even claim that this model would work only for them. And actually, they don't know if it's going to work even for the same size organization. Another thing is that we know that WCAG 3.0, is upcoming, and it's going to be probably also changing the way how do we think about accessibility and accessibility compliance, because probably it would be rely more on how we do the process of designing things and solutions, instead of just meeting certain criteria. And lastly, very interesting example comes from American Psychological Association that published their own accessibility and inclusion maturity model, where they very strictly recognize that universal design and inclusive design are two different things. And also they stated what they take the best from each of those words. And intersectionality, or actually recognizing that, was one of their driving values. And when they were building that maturity, they were cooperating, and here is important, cooperating with other departments in APA that were also serving to represent the needs of underserved groups. And just to giving an answer, this is the quote from lastly, I think it was published even like June this year, paper that comes from WCHD, Neuroatypical Person Workforce, about accessibility and what needs we need. And the quote says, and I think it's actually very nice equivalent for what we know already, accessibility is not a checkbox. It is a commitment to care. We shift accessibility from a reactive fix to a proactive collaboration. As we move beyond compliance toward empathy and equity, we call on designers, developers, and institutions alike to build not only for access, but for agency. And I would like to close my speech with another quote that comes from the Beast of a Burden book written by Sunara Taylor, which herself is a person with disability, but she is also actively engaged in many sorry, I forgot to breathe again. So yeah, so she is involved also actively in fighting, let's say, for rights of other underserved groups and animals. And she's very clear about intersectionality, that this is like the dependency that we should take as something that can push us forward. Like really often we care about the same things. We still have like our universal, like very specific needs, but there is also a lot that connects us together. As the quote here also, you can see all of us exist along a spectrum of dependency. The challenge is to understand dependency not simply as negative, and certainly not as neutral, but rather as an integral part of our world and our relationship. And I would say, in terms of our context, which is like, again, a global organization, that quote is very helpful, because it also shows us that although we are now doing something, we can help a lot of underserved groups that are living in and outside of our organization. So we should rely on those dependencies and actively involve different groups into shaping what we, or actually into the vision we aim for. And this is basically end of my presentation, but I mentioned at the beginning that I am currently doing a PhD research, and yeah, I'm on like PhD faculty, I don't know how to say that. I am on my PhD, oh, that's simpler. So if any of you, for example, agreed with what I've said, or you find it interesting, or otherwise, you think it's a total nonsense, actually, I love to hear from you and learn more. So you can also tell me that and help me build and write my PhD thesis. Other than that, thank you for being here with me. And I hope you're going to enjoy the rest of the conference. And here's the list of references I was using during the presentation. We will find them also in the conspect. Some of you may be scanned. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert. And we have time for a Q&A. Yeah, that's why this chair is here. Okay, so maybe I will kick off the Q&A. So one thing that got me thinking when listening to this presentation was that you focused a lot about including different kind of intersectional people into the research. And I've been thinking about the presentation by Kay McKershare, author of the Beyond Sticky Notes book. I don't know if you had the pleasure to read it, maybe. And she was sharing a story about how she...
I will come here because I have like a problem, like hearing what you are saying, so that's why.
I know this problem pretty much. Yeah, and she 2 years ago during the conference, she was sharing a story about how she was facilitating the participatory design workshops with the indigenous people from New Zealand. And it was a failure, actually. And on one of the sticky notes, she found a message from one of the participants that I am not your problem to be solved. And that led her to writing the Beyond Sticky Notes book, of course, but also to the fact that you need to also think about who is involved in the process as the designer, as the researcher. And I've been wondering, because that is a problem, because, for example, in my case, I don't have all of the experiences of the intersectional people. How can we, as designers, as researchers, cope with that problem?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I believe like the inclusive research as an approach kind of promotes, first of all, that we would constantly educate ourselves about the different intersections and how those can overlap. But secondly, it teaches us that we shouldn't go on that journey alone. So for example, I had like full team of people who were helping me with that. So we've been bringing, let's say, diversity, not only among, the people who are we inviting to the product, but also the diversity of people that were kind of like organizing that, right? I mentioned that for example, it's like reality of big corporations, that you have like parallel streams that do something, but they don't know about each other, although they kind of aim to achieve the same. So for example, in our case, we had like totally different team that was responsible to drive change in our organization for neuroatypical people, for example, right? But we find out that, for example, the standards they are building are different than the standards that other groups were building, and sometimes they were contradictory. So we start as soon as possible, try to reach to them, and more show that this is like our cooperation of like various parts of the organization, and that yes, our goal is the same, and let's talk about it, how we can best fix the situation to include all here. So I think that would be the answer to your question, if it matches with it, I hope.
It does. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to invite you to ask your questions. Also, you can use the WazeConf app, and I will check the messages on the chat. So let's start. I will run over to you with the microphone. Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
While your insights and conclusions are very true for when you ran the research in 2023, the situation seems to be changing right now in the world, and we see many large companies, Roche included, cutting some of their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in 2025. So my question would be, how do you feel about this, and has it impacted your work in any way this year?
Yeah, so that's a hard topic to say about that, right? Because as a global company, we need to recognize all the laws that they are in place currently, but it doesn't mean we need to stop just because of law in one country, that we still can drive things that are important for us. None of such law that we know says, for example, that human rights are bad. So we are trying to really embed also our internal policy in the knowledge and standards we already have in our organization and show that actually what we are doing is just natural extension of what we've been always doing. One part of it is like making health accessible for everyone. And of course, there is like some political, I would say, things that we have to be mindful about and use certain words instead of others. Because of course we have like the, the list of criteria we should follow. Nevertheless, the thing with the criteria is that we still can meet them and do what we believe is right there. So thank you for that question. I think it's great, but also like quite hard, especially in that situation. My opinion is that as a company, we also know that what we are doing is right, and we will be doing that in respect to any law, but we will still be promoting human rights mostly. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Actually, we have one question from the mobile app, which is nice.
Okay, I will come here, sorry.
Yeah, okay. So for the organizations with fewer resources than Roche, what's the minimum viable set of practices you'd recommend to move beyond compliance toward accessibility?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So maybe just to make it clear, just because we are like a bigger company, our team who is responsible for that, we are not big, we don't have like too many resources. Although I can imagine we still have more than like small startups or maybe just like small enterprises. I would say that some tools are available there and you can use them, but more as an inspiration, I guess, and really try to understand, first of all, and actually the message I've tried to send, right? What is your current situation? Why you are driving that change in your organization? Is it because you want to be compliant or because you really want to serve the people? And depending on that, you can pick probably the best tools and best methods to achieve that. Another thing that I think maybe some of you was able to catch up, there is no one definition of accessibility. And it's also up to you how you're gonna define it, right? Like the current research about the accessibility actually shows that those groups that really often are like, let's say, underestimated when it comes to accessibility are older people from ethnic minorities. And that in the end, especially in the case of health, those gonna be excluded. Another thing is, think what case of accessibility would match to your context, right? Our is like quite specific, I would say, because we don't have individual customers, right? So like many of the presentations about the revenue that comes from the accessible website doesn't really apply to us, but I believe there is for sure like a very specific context that would work for your organization. But it also would open for what characteristic you should think of when you're making that definition of accessibility. In our case, it's health. It's also like research, it also like clinical trials, right? Where we also would be aiming into that, so those tools would be accessible and inviting for the people who might be there. So I would say it's really what I can recommend, although I try to like avoid giving, gold recipes and stuff like this. I would say that inclusive research may be something that better, or actually help you better understand the context you should work with and how you should shape some definitions so they would work for you.
Thank you. Okay, and I guess that we have time for one last, let's say, concise question. And I cannot see any hands raised. Okay, so the question will be from me. If you had to recommend, one, I don't know, article, book, e-learning course for people who would like to start doing the inclusive research, what would it be? Because the bibliography was quite long.
Yes, that's true. I would probably recommend go with it depends what you like. If you preferred like a short texts, you will find in that presentation the article on the Canadian Institute of Health Research that very shortly describe the inclusive research and how you can utilize it in your everyday work. If you have more time, there is a book, Inclusive Research, Research Methods, by Melanie Nint, I believe. But what I see also like more recent scientific literature about accessibility is also underlying more relevance and importance of like intersectionality in the research we do, even if it's like very specific user tests or user research about accessibility. So yeah.
Thanks. And in a minute, we will have the 19 minutes of coffee break, so that might be the good time to grab at least one of these articles. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause.